Humans, yes. Mutants, no. Humans, yes. Mutants, no.
Hey there, Gothamites. Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now somewhere in upstate New York. She's Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
Doing well. I cannot complain. You and I have had a nice little break, nice little vacation of sorts. You had the wise idea that we should just skip town for a couple of days. So we did that. Took a trip to Santa Barbara, California. First time I've ever been.
That's so wild to me that you've never been to Santa Barbara. It's just a 2-hour drive, if that.
I've never had anyone suggest, hey, why don't we go up to Santa Barbara? Until you. And I'm glad you did. And I'm glad that my first experience in Santa Barbara was with you. I'm just confused as to how you and I have been together so long, and still we've never taken a trip up to Santa Barbara before. But it was cool. It was a nice little town, and I cannot complain about the relaxation that you and I got to partake in. You still get a few more days. I had to work Anime Expo at the LA Convention Center on July 4th. I was there that morning and had a lot of fun selling anime to anime fans and just talking anime. So that was cool. And then now we get to talk X-Men. So I'm always excited when we get to sit down at this table across from one another. And
there is something that we were talking about recently is what we're covering next. And you just reminded me that there is that Suicide Squad anime style.
Oh, yeah.
Dubbed series.
Not dubbed.
It's not dubbed?
Subbed.
Subbed.
Yeah.
Subbed, not
or at
dubbed.
least, well, I don't know. It could be dubbed, but the trailer that we saw on Max was subbed.
Subbed.
It's all in Japanese.
So originally Japanese. The style looks very cool. It just seems really edgy.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell you this, but I think we should add it to the list of the long growing list of things that we may want to put on the poll to cover.
Okay. We can do that. All right.
We're still under 10 shows.
Right.
Out for the poll.
Right.
So look, if you're listening to this or watching this.
Yeah. I have to look at that trailer a little bit more before I decide, because it's a very action-packed trailer, and I think there's going to be
stuff in there.
I'm concerned.
Okay. Well, look, if you're listening to this or watching this, stay tuned till the end of the show, and we will list out all of the contenders for what we are covering after we finish X-Men, the first animated series, season 1, followed by something maybe at Comic-Con that we haven't yet announced.
Yep.
That releases us in August to then cover something brand new or continue the original X-Men animated series, go on to season 2. And I feel like this season is going to end on a cliffhanger, which will likely energize us for covering season 2, but we usually leave it up to our listeners. Yeah. How this works is that we put a longer list on Discord. So Discord, which, again, I've said this before, free, community-based, we pop in there once in a while, no paywall. When you're in Discord, you'll see the full list of what we are considering covering, and then after that, the top 3 or 4, probably 3 or 4, right, will go to Patreon. Yeah. And Patreon is where our patrons will then put it up to an actual decisive vote, and that's what will determine what we cover next.
And to be clear, in order to be eligible to vote, you have to be our second tier Patreon member, and that is it's $3 a month. That gives you an opportunity to vote on what we're covering next.
And I'm a $3 member because I like to vote. I don't know if folks know that.
No one has ever known that before.
Does anyone know
but
this?
You have.
I actually do vote.
Shifted your weight a little bit, or you've presented.
I don't mind
your
saying
personal
this.
choices.
Because
but I will say this.
Maybe it'll encourage people
to outvote you. Yeah. I will say this. You've been very good about giving your very real opinion of what we should cover. And it hasn't always won. And you've never complained. You've never shifted your vote. You've never changed, or whatever. Like you've gone with it. You've said, hey, the fans have spoken and we are listening. So, bravo for you on that. I don't have my own Patreon.
So you don't vote?
I don't vote, no.
Wow.
Because I think that if the Arkham sessions voted for what we cover next, I don't know.
But you are a separate entity.
I
Brian.
am.
You
am.
Don't just represent the Arkham sessions.
No.
Because when I vote for
you.
what I want.
Yes.
Not what the collective wants.
And in my opinion, when we put the list out there into the world, I would be happy with any of the winners. So I am not concerned about what wins. I will happily analyze with you whatever the fans decide.
The last thing I'll say about this, because we need to move on, is that
now that we're giving people a peek behind the curtain.
The last thing I'll say is we don't ever put anything on the list that we dislike or would not enjoy.
Yeah.
Or have
we have put things on the list that we've never seen before.
Sure.
There's something on the current list that we have never seen before.
Well, I just put that Suicide Squad anime on there, so there's
but in addition to that,
you've not even seen a trailer
other
for that.
things that we have not seen.
This
before.
is true. This is true. We really do kind of, give it up to the universe.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. It's a good exercise in trying something out, especially if you're not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, too, for our show, psychology is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. It's in all media, first and foremost, but it's everywhere. And yes, there are going to be shows that may yield more challenges for me as far as how to dig in and find content that is worthy of some kind of analysis, but also that we've not really covered before. We do a lot of we repeat a lot of topics, but we try not to repeat the conversations that we have.
And admittedly, the title I can think of right off the top of my head is one that's requested, I would say, weekly, if not daily.
Is it MASH?
No. No,
because I've never seen MASH and I don't care to.
No, Batman Beyond is constantly asked for because people really like those stories and they like the relationship between Terry and Bruce. But you and I watched like 4 or 5 episodes and we recorded it for our Patreon members. And you had a significant amount of difficulty plucking out psychological science because while it's a good action-packed show, unlike Batman the Animated Series and anything else we've covered since Batman the Animated Series, it was not something that warranted a deep conversation every episode. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for deep conversations every single episode. And someone who's got like the powers of an ink spot didn't give it to us. So, I don't, I'm not complaining, but that's why I appreciate the patrons and our Discord members whittling these titles down, because these are the folks who have been with us for a long time. These are the folks who maybe even just started joining us, but they get it. They know what it is we're looking for, and that's how we've gotten as successful as we have with the topics that we've been covering
Totally.
is because these people know how to pick
And
stuff
we've
for
got to
us.
stay within some set of
Rules.
variables. Yeah, so
Yeah.
some principles, which is why MASH ain't it. Anyway, let's move forward. Not a
You
single
might be
person. Not a
surprised.
single person has
You
asked
might
me
be
about MASH.
surprised. By the time you get to the end of MASH, you'll be in tears. But we should say that there are a couple of things that we wanted to discuss a little bit more in depth. We have mentioned in the past that there's a Kickstarter that you and I are both
Yeah.
attached to that is currently live. It's roughly, I would say, just shy of halfway through its Kickstarter run. And we are near the halfway point in our actual goal. And so we're very excited about that. David Nett and actor Todd Stashwick, two very dear friends of ours, have released this Kickstarter. And it is a multimedia event. If you like tabletop role-playing games, if you just like fantasy, this would speak to you. You don't have to be a player to enjoy what they have to offer. It is centered around D&D, 5th edition specifically, but it doesn't have to be D&D. It's basically a system of role-playing that you as a DM or you as a player can infuse into your game to make it feel more wonderful, mysterious, and dangerous. So unlike some players or some DMs who choose creatures that are appropriate to the level of the characters playing around the table, etc., this is a system that's encouraging you to say, that is way too deadly to attack right now. We should run away. We should, and so as a result, it creates a world in which you have no idea what's around the corner. You don't know if this is something you can or even should face. And it makes it that much more thrilling and exciting. It gives you the goosebumps when you start to hear your DM or your game master of whatever game you're playing describing sounds and smells and the sights.
There's a hyperphantasia to this,
Yeah.
which is an interest and an embrace of the details around
Yeah.
adventure and adventurous and mysterious storytelling. In other words, for folks who really like to be immersed in the unknown, in the uncertainties, in the excitement, as well as the dangerousness of not knowing what's around the corner, what's in the mist, what I hear a creature, I don't know. So for those of us who have a tendency toward that level of imagination, just really getting a thrill out of that, but also having this tendency to be to be seduced by this kind of storytelling.
Right.
It's super cool.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's, if you like anything related to that, check it out. It's it's called, I don't know if you mentioned this, it's called Progcore.
Right. Go to progcorefantasy.com. It'll take you directly to the Kickstarter page. When I say that you don't have to be a player, I'm serious. If you just love reading fantasy stories, they're going to create a book of fantasy stories. You're talking about a couple of dozen stories, and we're also talking about people who are heavy hitters as writers and contributors to this book, and they each get a crack at creating cool stories in this world that David and Todd have created. If you love fantasy artwork, they have got some amazing artists. If you love sort of progressive rock style music, we're talking late 70s, early 80s, very synth and guitar heavy music. We're talking Zeppelin, we're talking Styx, we're talking Yes, we're talking Genesis. if you like that sort of music, they have got musicians that are going to create songs and an entire album just for playing to get you into this mood, this mood that a lot of people don't necessarily feel anymore when they're getting ready for their gameplay, or even just a night out. You know, if you're just looking for some music, or you're looking for a story to read, or you're just looking for some art to look at. It's meant to put you into that mind space. And Drea, we've said that you and I are involved. I didn't just produce their Kickstarter intro for them. I am set to direct an actual play that's sort of in a documentary style. And an actual play is literally us filming a D&D game as if we were in our own homes playing that D&D game. So unlike places like Critical Role or Dimension 20 or whatever, all great, but they feel produced. They feel they're on a stage. They've got big sets around them or whatever. This is meant to feel like our games being played in Todd Stashwick's Nerd Lair. And if you've not seen Todd Stashwick's Nerd Lair, I highly recommend you go to his Instagram and check it out. But we really want to play this game, and you would be at the table.
I would love to end up playing D&D with some personal idols, and
Todd would be there.
I would get to play D&D with my DM. So Todd is typically in the campaign we're in. He's our DM. He'll be playing. David will be the DM.
Mm-hmm. We've got Mark Bernardin, who is an award-winning comic book and television writer. Fantastic storyteller in his own right. We've got Geek and Sundry founder and actress Felicia Day will be a part of the game. We have got the voice of Spider-Man himself in the Spider-Man video games. Yuri Lowenthal would be a part of that game. You're looking at our new friend, their old friend Anjali, who's a wonderful voice actress as well, and on-screen actress as well. She is going to be a part of the game. Trying to think who. It's a Todd, you, Felicia, Mark, Anjali. Yeah, that's right. That's 6. So that's the 6 of you.
If anything. Maybe you don't play D&D, or maybe you're not a big fan of D&D, but if you like our content, that'll be a part of this.
And you'll find Drea play with these people. Yeah.
Oh, as an unseasoned newbie to D&D, maybe you'd like to see a usually refined, well-spoken, studied person be out of their element and stumble clumsily through.
You're a wonderful player. And we're being told that this particular adventure is like basically being handcrafted for someone like you. So we don't know what that means exactly, only that it's important that you be a player at the table. So because David is such a great storyteller and loves to infuse a lot of character into these stories, I think we're probably looking forward to something deep and dark and moody and maybe a little psychological. I don't know.
That's my jam.
That's your jam.
I love all those things.
Go to progcorefantasy.com. That's progfantasy.com. Contribute today. There are lots of really great tiers. Check them out as well. All right, so we have talked about those things. We've also got to remind folks about a certain convention that's coming up and our involvement. As we've mentioned in the last couple of episodes, we will be at Comic-Con in San Diego this late July. We will have a panel. And we're being told that will be announced this coming week. We are not allowed to announce it until it is up on the schedule, but just keep an eye out on our Instagram and various social media. We will let you know where you can find us at Comic-Con, but we are so excited about it. All we can say is if you're liking the conversations we are currently having, you're going to love this panel. And I'm very excited for it. Okay. Part 2, Days of Future Past. We've got some things that have been revealed in this episode that we are allowed to talk about. And we get to find out who was the mysterious assassin. What member of the X-Men assassinates who? And we now have those answers.
We also have some clarity on what actually happens in the future.
Yes.
So there's a bit of storytelling around, because of the assassination. Now, we don't know the immediate aftermath, but we understand that that critical event led to the development and building of the Sentinel Army.
Right.
To a degree that it is, just this giant force. Who runs that army remains unclear, at least in this episode.
Yeah.
I think we know what's coming, but it talks about in this episode too, of course, mutants fighting back, rebelling, but losing the battle because not only are the Sentinels multiple and forceful and they're essentially beating down mutants, they're also taking them into these new detention camps. Mm-hmm. And so think Muir Island, but think of these more as like...
And Genosha.
Yeah. These are... The way that they describe these detention camps is once you're in, you're not coming out.
Right.
To the degree that it sounds, even though this episode didn't say this, these are extermination camps.
Yes, and this was a similar camp to the one that Bishop was escorting Wolverine and the 2 unnamed mutants that he was trying to rescue from the Sentinels. We know that the assassination attempt leads to, like you said, Master Mold creating more Sentinels. But here's the thing that's interesting is not only are the Sentinels going against mutants, they eventually start going against all the other governments in the world as well. And this is now starting to sound very familiar. It sounds a whole lot like Apocalypse because he wanted everyone.
So far, he is the only villain who specifically goes after
everybody,
all beings.
Yes.
Yes. And I love this exchange, when the X-Men are learning about this dystopian future and understanding that they essentially have to find out who is supposedly going to be assassinated, but who commits the crime. That's what they're sort of in detective mode around this.
And we had sort of been told at the end of the last episode that it's Gambit.
That it might be Gambit because Bishop recognizes Gambit and that could only be the reason, right? Mm-hmm. But I love that on 2 separate occasions in these conversations, Storm brings up the idea that it could be anybody. Mm-hmm. And in one moment, Storm says, we all have a dark side to our souls. And in another moment, Storm says, we are all capable of evil. And I just appreciated it. It adds to the mystery, right? We don't know who this could be. And I think that's good tension building. But I also love that it comes from Storm, this idea of, you can't really, there's a sadness to this when Storm says it, especially like,
Why
I
you
think
say
there are
that?
2 things here.
So explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, one thing is, just a wisdom around human nature that sometimes bad things happen and people react. We all have this internal capacity for destruction, and there's a wisdom to that. Like we are not all perfect. We're not flawless. We could succumb to something dangerous inside of us or as a response to something dangerous in the world. And I felt that was very realistic. And then the second thing that it might mean is Jean Grey. Is that what's happening here, where Storm is...
Or she just keeps like pointing at Jean over there. She keeps sort of like nudging. Hey, look, seriously, we could all be evil, right?
Like
Jean?
one of my nicest friends has turned to the dark side.
And we are reminded that in the episode leading up to this, part 1 of Days of Future Past, Jean did say, we all know that I've had my, my dark days. And we didn't know if that was alluding directly to the Dark Phoenix saga or not.
Yeah.
You believed that it was. I think that that's too big a story to sweep under the rug and say that it's behind us. I think that that's something that we'll still see eventually, but she is certainly cognizant of the fact that she could be an assassin under the right circumstances.
Right. And that anybody, like that's one example that we know of, that essentially anybody could turn to destructive behaviors.
Yeah. Well, and she admits to Gambit, who is, of course, fighting this tooth and nail, that it might not even be something we're aware of right now.
Right.
We do not know the circumstances surrounding this assassination. So just because you think you're not an assassin now doesn't mean that in the right circumstances, you could not get caught up in something that ultimately you trigger this dystopian world later on Earth. It is interesting. Gambit defends himself so vehemently. He is so convinced that he couldn't possibly be an assassin, while the other members of the X-Men seem to sort of turn on him. Yes, you do have someone like Storm saying, look, let's calm down. We don't know the circumstances. There are other people like Wolverine who say, yeah, we know about as much about Bishop, maybe even a little more than we know about you. You've always been mysterious.
Toward Gambit. And Gambit takes this personally, and similar to, say, Judas finding out that he's going to be the one that turns Jesus in right before what we celebrate as Easter. He then leaves. He is being told by all these people, you have to understand there's a strong possibility that you are going to be the assassin. And that's what this guy from the future is telling us, and whatever. And he says no, and he leaves. Well, there's some cool time travel narrative happening where we understand that he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't believe he wants to do it, but circumstances and the contextual environment may tell a different tale.
Right.
And
we're led to believe that his leaving might actually be triggering the events.
And I even turned to you and said, what if all of this ruckus somehow causes the very bad thing to happen because of all the chaos.
Right.
But you're right. They try to essentially babysit him and keep him watched, and he frees himself, and everyone goes to the Capitol, which seems like a bad idea, because isn't that where this is going to go down?
Well, Xavier is supposed to be giving a speech there. And so he already knew he would be there. And we know that there are politicians that are going to be there. He takes the other X-Men, save Wolverine, who is left to babysit Gambit and Bishop. And they decide to go in plain clothes and participate in this big event. Gambit escapes to go stop the event, which is just a bad idea because, like we said, this could be the thing that triggers everything. Bishop and Wolverine chase him down to the Capitol. And there we learn that Gambit is the person responsible for assassinating Senator Kelly, who has been one of the most vocal against mutant kind in general. And Gambit turns a gun on Senator Kelly and says, this is going to teach you not to mess with me, Gambit, and my X-Men. Except it's not Gambit.
It's not Gambit.
It's not Gambit.
Once we see some shape-shifting, we know this is the work of Mystique.
This is the work of Mystique.
And it's toward the end of the episode where all these things unfold.
Yeah.
Not all the answers are given, but a couple of very big things are learned. One is that it's not Gambit. It's not even technically an X-Man. It's Mystique, who tries to assassinate Senator Kelly.
On the orders of Apocalypse.
Yes. And in some way, while obviously violence is not the answer, my understanding is the justification is this senator is the one behind the programming and the legislature that is harming mutants. So there is some rationale to this. The relationship to Apocalypse, as we knew from previous episodes, is that Mystique is in service to Apocalypse and somehow believes in the ideology.
Yeah.
It's clear that, at least to me, Mystique doesn't necessarily care for the means, but is pretty aligned to the end result.
Yes.
And sees in Apocalypse's vision, sees maybe some liberation for herself.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is Gambit intercepts, and if you have kind of like a moment, a classic moment of like, which is the real Gambit, and that allows for Bishop and I think Wolverine and others to realize it wasn't Gambit at all. It was Mystique.
Right. And they are able to successfully foil the assassination plot and effectively confuse Senator Kelly, because as he's being ushered out and meets up with Xavier and Scott and Jean, says straight up, "I'm confused. One of you was going to kill me, and then the same one came in and saved me. I don't really know what to think at this point."
Well, how about not all mutants are the same?
Right.
I mean, one of the lessons that this episode brings up is clear. It's not a monolith. You can't lump all mutants into one ideology or one perspective or one set of politics. They are just as diverse as non-mutants and deserve that level of respect and that level of non-discrimination.
Which is a lesson that people need to learn about everyone today.
Oh, totally.
Here in the world. I mean, it's not every American is the same. Not every European is the same. Not every person of any one religion or any, there are countless iterations of people in this world. Not every one of them is going to be the same, regardless of whatever label you want to attach to.
Well, and what I like and what I've always liked about X-Men the Animated Series, and I'd say this is true for Batman the Animated Series, is that they're telling you a story, and folded in the story are these interpersonal, social, identity-related questions and lessons and ideas, but no one ever breaks that fourth wall and tells you what to think.
Right.
So in the 80s, I didn't watch G.I. Joe as much, but I know that you had these shows where there was probably a lesson in the show, and then literally at the end of the show, you'd be given a lecture about what you should have.
He-Man did that.
He-Man did that. G.I. Joe did that.
G.I. Joe ended with PSAs.
Didn't Captain Planet do some version of like, we're always doing the right thing and let us tell you the right thing that we're doing?
Right. But for them, that was very clear. It was very black and white. If someone is depositing a radioactive ooze into the river, we know that's not a very complex. There's very little gray area there.
Do you need Captain Planet to lecture you about it? Maybe some younger children do.
Yeah.
Let me be clear. I'm not hating on. This is not my hate toward any of the 80s cartoons.
I would argue to your credit and,
Sure.
and on your side. I'm going to piggyback on that statement by saying He-Man and G.I. Joe, which were predecessors to this series and even Batman, they were made as sort of gateways to...
I know what you're going to say.
So that we could understand good and bad.
Oh, that is not what I thought you were going to say.
We could understand good versus evil in the least complicated way. And then as these stories became much more mature and we matured with them, it required a little bit of gray thinking, and it required a little bit of like, maybe this isn't so.
You're saying the 7, 8, 9-year-old who was watching He-Man is now the 12, 13, 14-year-old watching X-Men.
Correct.
I don't disagree with that. What I thought you were going to say is that those earlier shows were produced to sell toys.
Sure.
And that, we know that.
But let's be clear, this show was also produced to sell toys.
How dare you?
And comic books, and
You shut
it's
your
still
mouth.
a big, massive multimedia
dare you? This is
universe.
just a creative project.
Yes, this is just a creative project.
Well, I thought you were going to say that the type of writing was secondary to selling the toys, and so sometimes they took some shortcuts. Let's stay away. So again, I'm not here to criticize earlier cartoons, but there's actually a really good example here in this episode. I wonder if you can play it. With Senator Kelly, there's another administrator, there's some other government worker who's with him.
Yeah, who was watching the hearing, and then accompanies Kelly to his office.
She's not accidental. She seems like a background character, but it's important because she witnesses the way in which Mystique can shapeshift. And did you notice how she describes Mystique? If you could play this clip.
For sure. Let me pull it up. Here it is. Let's take a listen.
Are you all right, Senator?
What I am is confused. First, one of you mutants tries to kill me. Then another one saves me. Only it's the same one.
There's a woman who looked like me who changed into a man, and, well, it's back there.
So the way that this conversation ends is that that's actually how it kind of hangs there. There's not even much of a beat there. It kind of moves on. I don't think that it was an accidental thing in the writing. I think it was intentional for this person who doesn't understand mutants and certainly doesn't understand shapeshifters to call Mystique it. And I think, unless otherwise specified, calling anybody it is either, very ignorant or possibly, most likely, dehumanizing, pretty demeaning to land there.
But if you were captured, because what we didn't say was this woman was tied up and bound in the office. When he comes in, her clone comes in behind Kelly and then morphs into Gambit.
Right.
So
I think this woman, and here's why, I think I know what you're saying, but here's why I had a pause. I appreciated that. There are a couple things about this to think about. One is that, that woman was kind of traumatized by what happened and sees Mystique as this kind of like creature. And it is where this lady landed. Now, from the perspective of Mystique, being a shapeshifter is normal everyday life. And for Mystique, and we've had other shapeshifters that are no longer on the show, like Morph, I truly believe a shapeshifter character on the show is representing, or could represent, a lot of different experiences for us who are watching the show. Shapeshifters can represent folks who essentially don't fall into commonly acknowledged categories as it relates to gender, race, neurodevelopment, and other identities that I'd say have some mutability about that expression. So the concept of like code switching, moving between these socially constructed categories.
Masking.
I think masking, yeah. So for those folks with neurodevelopmental conditions, masking comes to mind, where you can background and even hide some of the features that are people are less receptive to. Someone like me who's mixed race, we can sometimes be in the in-between and kind of live our lives in the in-between, where for us it's normal everyday living, but we're people demand from us, which category are you actually in? And therefore that defines your culture and your behavior and your perception, your perspectives, all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So there's this pressure to kind of like try to fit. And certainly, especially now, I think about being non-binary and how Mystique, especially as it relates to how this woman describes Mystique, is, one of these people who don't identify solely in this binary construct where you are one or the other, or one of two genders, where you can kind of, you have this gender fluidity to your identity and your expression.
Yeah, if you could literally become male or female in any way, shape, and form you wanted, literally, it's hard to assign a single gender to what what is you?
Well,
like
and,
what
and
do
I
you really look like?
I would certainly,
which is why in the current series, in the 97 series, Morph is referred to as they.
Right. And so I would presume that, again, I don't know Mystique deeply, but I would assume that Mystique would not ascribe to a binary gender identity, that Mystique might be comfortable with the fluidity of, really depends on my expression and how I live my life. I believe that statement was intentional. That woman was expressing this bias against mutants, and it just kind of happens.
Yeah.
And so the reason I even mention this is I do really like shapeshifters. I think that shapeshifters are pretty cool. But I also mention it because
well, now what would you call Clayface? If Clayface went from being the maitre d' at the restaurant you were eating in to suddenly his true form of this big clay monster, would you refer
I would
to
wonder,
Clayface as it? Or?
No, of course not. I would ask Clayface, like, what
I'm not asking as a psychologist. I'm saying if you were someone running away from the thing terrorizing that restaurant, would you say, yeah, the monster's in there? It's in there. Or would you say he, she, they, whatever? I mean, depending on how certain shapeshifters are, I would be much more likely to call Clayface an it than I would Gambit, who's now standing in front of me, when he once looked like me or a woman or whatever. In this case, this shapeshifter went from one humanoid form to another humanoid form, as opposed to.
Well, and Mystique and certainly Clayface can become almost anything.
Yes.
And I don't know, like I hear you challenging me a little bit, and I want to acknowledge that we're still talking about fictional characters.
Oh yeah.
And so I don't know the answer to your question other than I think it's the way in which this woman reacts to Mystique tells me, one, you don't understand mutants.
Right.
Like you are, well, for one, you work with Senator Kelly. So you definitely
do not understand
probably
mutants.
hold some very negative assumptions about mutants, and you've just encountered a mutant who's doing something that horrifies you, moving in between figures, kind of assuming any shape, that's a big discourse that really terrifies this woman.
Yeah.
And
well,
it
that and
terrifies,
having been tied up and bound.
Of course, like there's a lot of trauma to this. It
Yes.
terrifies her, and let's be real. Mystique is a villain right now. So she's also carrying with her some villainous features, and does come across as lacking compassion and being very rigid in this ideology. Yes, it's scary. So I give you all that. I think what comes through for me is kind of getting back to this idea that the show and its writing wanted to just like, frankly, without additional context and without confusion and without it, just here it is. This is how this human being, this is how this non-mutant reacted.
Right.
And that is how they described this mutant.
Right.
And you sit with that as a viewer, and you don't have someone come on the screen and lecture you about how you should or shouldn't feel or think or believe in this. And all, the way in which we're responding to, even you and I are kind of responding to it slightly differently. And that's okay, because this is the kind of show that just wants to tell you the story and leave you sitting with those feelings for you to begin to process what it's like for this woman who was traumatized, and what it's like for Mystique to have this immense power and also be seen as less than human.
Right.
And so, that's the exercise. And that's why I love this show.
Yeah.
And I don't, also on this show, I don't want to come across as lecturing anybody either. I also want people to consider what they just listened to, and think about what that means for their identity and their lived experience and their choices. So we get a little bit of that in the show, and Mystique also reveals something to us that I kind of forgot about. I think that I knew a little bit about this, but it's her relationship to Rogue.
Yeah, because now that the walls are closing in and the assassination has been foiled, she expresses that Apocalypse is not going to be happy with her, and that she needs to get out. She needs to leave Kelly's office, and she asks Rogue to be the one to assist her to leave. And Rogue is like, "Why would I do that? You're a villain." And then Mystique reveals Rogue's mother to her, and
by turning into her mother.
Correct. And then says, not, "Oh, your mother would want you to do this," or "You remember this lady," or whatever. She's just straight up says, "I'm this lady, and this is the shape I was in."
I thought she was trying to manipulate her psychologically by showing up as her mom, like presenting as her mom. And then it hit me, no, this shapeshifter is actually revealing the truth. I took this form to adopt you and raise you, and I am your mother.
Yeah.
So I've got questions.
Okay. I'm curious about how I'm going to be able to answer them.
So a couple questions first. One, how long was she in this form? It seems like choosing a form to be a parent in is a commitment. Like, you're, at least until, I don't know how old Rogue was, but you've got to raise this child. So you have to be in that form and not reveal your true form for several years, at least a decade, 15 years, right?
Or at least while Rogue's in the room.
But then what does that mean? You're constantly...
There's a significant amount of childhood where the kid and the parent may not be together.
Look,
most of the
day. In the 80s, for sure.
But school, like, forget just going out into the woods and playing with your friends and, parents not seeming to care. you're in school for hours upon hours, and Rogue thought she was a normal little girl. She did not know she had a mutant ability. See, this is where it gets really tricky because it depends on which version of this story we're going with. And we don't know which version of this story these writers went with.
My understanding of Rogue's powers and when they emerged are when she's a young woman. She's like in her teens. Like it's dating. She's trying to date people.
Cody. Yeah. So
is Cody the guy?
Cody's the guy.
Yeah, so she's
so there
like
are a
in her
couple of different
teens.
stories that revolve around Rogue and her origin. One of them is that her parents were human and she ended up leaving after she discovered her mutant abilities. Mystique actually sort of brought her in, convinced her to take her in as her sort of adopted mother. But that being said, Mystique didn't take on some form of, a white blonde lady. She was basically like, let me be your mother. And by the way, why don't you join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants? And Rogue was a villain for a long time. Like Rogue was encouraged to use her powers to be part of this group. And in fact, that's where she ended up visiting Carol Danvers at her house. I think if I remember, Carol was like coming home from the grocery store and there was Rogue on her doorstep and fought with Danvers. And because of how powerful Carol is as Ms. Marvel at the time, Rogue inherited all of her mutant abilities. So the super strength, the ability to fly, the endurance, the stamina, like all of the powers we have seen Rogue use, with the exception of absorbing other people's powers. All of that came from Carol Danvers, and it all became permanent. Down to, how she'll also take in like the mind of someone temporarily. There was an entire subplot of the X-Men comics where Carol Danvers' actual personality was inside of Rogue. And it was a permanent thing until eventually they excised it and then destroyed that. Like, I think Magneto, someone destroyed the Carol Danvers personality that was living inside of her. But I mean, you talk about like some of the stories we've talked about with multiple personalities. This genuinely was a
She
case
did have
where,
another personality
where
in her.
Carol's sort of residual personality was living inside of her and all that stuff. So if we chuck most of that out, because just from what we can infer from this situation, Rogue thought her mother was human. Then we go with a different incarnation of the story, which is that, and then there was an incarnation of the story where Rogue fled home because her father was super abusive and not caring and all that, once he found out that she was a mutant. And then there was a version of the story where Rogue even said something to the effect of like, I don't remember my dad. He was never around. So like the Rogue's origin has changed depending on who's writing it.
And here in the animated series, we have so little of it.
Yeah.
But now we are learning this big thing, which is her whole upbringing was with Mystique as a non-mutant blonde woman.
Yeah.
I guess the best way to describe is like just an unassuming, like typical looking
She looks like a mom.
Yeah. Like
Just a button up blouse and some pants and that.
So I guess the second question is, so yes, the first question was, wow, she committed to this. How long did she do this? And the second question is, why this form? What made Mystique choose this characterization of mom?
Do you want my glib answer?
Sure.
Let's not forget Rogue comes from the South.
I mean, may not even be a glib answer.
So if you want, you're going to choose the white lady, the blonde white lady who sounds like this, and she's gonna, she's basically, one of the sugar bakers from Designing Women.
She needed to pick a form that Rogue would believe this could be
and trust
my mother.
Yeah.
That's fair.
A very benign looking lady.
She
doesn't stand out at all.
Very opposite from Mystique, which may be another part of the psychology here.
I mean, Mystique wears golden skulls as a belt.
Mystique stands out with, features and characteristics that she could not mask unless she shapeshifted.
Yeah.
And so I think it's also interesting that she chooses this form that is basically the opposite of that, like a backgrounded person, someone who kind of blends in.
Yeah, someone who will not stand out in a crowd.
Yeah, I wonder if that was somehow fulfilling or therapeutic for Mystique to choose that form. And the third question I have for you is...
To actually be a regular mom, is what you're saying.
Well, even the mom, notwithstanding, like just be a regular person.
Yeah.
And so, I do juxtapose that with moments ago, this other regular person calling Mystique it. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't surprise me that she would choose a form that, no one would question or discriminate against. Like, this is the form you chose. The third question I have for you is...
But also, why choose... You said, and that's where I find it interesting. You said a version, a form that other people would not necessarily discriminate against. That then leads my question, because a lot of times when we see Mystique, she is taking on the form of a man. And we cannot deny that traditionally men in contemporary times are the ones with the power.
For sure. Well, and when she enacts violence, so she chooses Gambit to enact violence and presumably assassinate somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would choose Gambit, but...
but Gambit's the one who's the most likely to sort of turn his back
pop off.
And let's not forget that and I don't know if this was conscious or not, but as we mentioned a few episodes back, Mystique was in Genosha when Gambit betrayed the X-Men that were there, Storm and Jubilee.
Right. So Mystique knows a little bit about his personality.
So it's very possible she saw him as an opportunity to become him as the assassin.
Sure.
But my initial question though was, we see her take on the form of men often, and especially men with power. But here she chose to be Rogue's mother, not Rogue's father. Does that make sense?
It does.
Like, she didn't choose a male form. She chose a female form who may not have the power of a dad in the public eye, especially wherever they were living.
Well, but a mom has the power of like caregiving.
Yeah, she would be able to raise her and mold her.
Yeah, I mean that truly. Like,
yes.
The mom power is about family.
Yes.
I don't. It's interesting that this conversation has become very gendered. We've been talking about Mystique, who doesn't necessarily always have the same gender.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think about, like, this mom form that she took isn't necessarily powerless. It's about what kind of power do you want to have.
Yes.
And I agree with you. I think you're getting here is that Mystique is decisive. Like, there's something about Mystique's discernment.
Yes.
Where this is not a randomness to it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
So my question for you, my third question for you is the why. Like, why adopt? And you may have already answered it, but why adopt Rogue? Did Mystique see potential in Rogue and wanted to harness that? Was this about, I don't have any children and this person needs a loving home? Rogue also in this episode, clearly hurt and confused, is asking questions. Why did you do this to me? Why did you see me on Muir Island? And didn't she say, like, why did you let me suffer? Like, why were you okay with
you
it?
were about to strap me into a machine and make me a slave to Apocalypse. Why did you let that happen? You were my mom. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so rightly so. I'd have the same questions.
Well, and that's a question I want you to really maintain, because
Oh my gosh, why?
the more and more we learn about Mystique, the more and more I want to hear your thoughts on her, because we don't really have enough to go into it yet. But depending on the writers of the comics, Mystique can sometimes come off as very, there can be a lot of psychopathy there, where she's not caring at all. She, like, everything is used to manipulate other people.
Okay.
And she's not always presented that way, but there have been writers that have really taken advantage of her ability to shift everything about herself so frequently and so often that now she's just sort of constantly code switching and may not ever truly have her own emotion.
That's such a good definition of psychopathy.
Thanks.
Like, not
it only took 10 years of a podcast.
I know, really not anchoring to any kind of morality at all.
Yeah. And so that is, I want you to have that question in your mind whenever you see Mystique, because is she manipulating anyone and everyone that she's talking with, even Apocalypse? Or is she genuinely terrified of Apocalypse right now, and she genuinely just wants to do whatever it takes to survive?
Yeah.
Even if it means handing over the girl she raised as her own daughter for years. And did that trouble her? Because in that episode, it didn't seem like it troubled her.
Yeah, well, and talk about soap operas.
She did ask Apocalypse, "Are you sure her? Are you like? Does it have to be her?"
Yeah.
And Apocalypse did say, like, "Oh, are you kidding me? She's so powerful. Look at that. Well, yes, I need her on my team." And Mystique's like, "Well, okay."
But it's such a soap opera moment, like, I'm your mother, like the
This was a
person
Days of
you're
Our
fighting
Lives
against
moment, yeah.
is your mother. It's I love this show.
But also the fact that Rogue, we didn't see her make the decision. We only know that when they entered the room, they weren't there. And then we see Rogue and Mystique at the aftermath, where clearly Rogue did help her escape. I found myself thinking, it's so unfortunate that this is a 22-minute episode of a cartoon series about the X-Men, because I feel like I would have liked to have had more of that convincing prior to us just seeing her do it. Because, if one of my parents tried to assassinate someone right in front of me and then was like, "But I'm your parents," I would just be like, "And?" Like, this doesn't seem like something. I wouldn't feel all that conflicted and help you escape, but Rogue did. And so that's something I would like to explore more. And I hope we get the opportunity with future episodes of the animated series. I hope that they see each other more often. And I'm not saying they need to see each other, every episode or every other episode, but I would like to see more interactions between the two of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, me too.
Because I want to know, is it just a matter of, hey, would you answer this question for me? Or was she genuinely feeling conflicted and felt the need to rescue her mother from an inevitable,
I think
years upon years in a prison?
I just wonder if it was the need to know more, like discovering this and needing more answers and unwilling to give this person up. So the twist at the end, though, is that, yes, they prevent the assassination from happening. And when we learn the assassination was going to be of this senator. Now, Bishop gets sent back to the future.
Rogue takes the device off his wrist that was given to him by Forge that keeps him grounded in our time versus sending him back to his. Right. And then he goes back to his time and
from what he can observe, it hasn't changed.
Yeah.
So even though they prevented the critical event from happening, the future is still dystopian. The mutants are still being persecuted and
you know what would have
terminated.
been great though is like, because he's like, nothing changed, and then Forge is like, well then you can go back as many times as you want until we fix it. And then Bishop says, no, but I did stop it. We stopped it. There was no
Right.
assassination. And Forge is like, well, then I guess something happened after that still kept this down this path. If they fixed it so that there was no assassination, Forge should not have known there was an assassination. Like Forge should have then been like, what are you talking about? You were sent there to stop Senator Kelly from getting kidnapped and taken to the whatever. And Bishop's like, what? That's not why I was sent. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like there should have been no confusion. You know, Forge would have been like, oh, maybe you did stop something that I don't remember because it never happened in this version
Well,
of
and
our
wouldn't
world.
Forge know what happened? Like,
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is like Forge would be like, what? Oh, you must not have
Oh, I see what you
prevented
mean.
Senator
Yes.
Kelly's kidnapping.
Yeah.
And then Bishop's like,
was-
I wasn't sent to do that. I was sent to stop its assassination. And they're like, he was never assassinated. What are you talking about?
yeah, the idea too that Bishop goes back in time dozens and hundreds of times is disturbing. You know, it's kind of caught in this loop. And yes, a lot of things should be different. And would Forge even be there? Yeah, I don't know. There would be a lot of things.
Yeah, like who sent him back if it wasn't
it would be
Forge?
so much better if someone else pops out of that lab. It's not Forge, but it's some other mutant.
Some of the mutants there, and they're like, did it work? And he's like, who are
He's
you?
like,
and they're
"Who are
like,
you?"
I'm the one who sent you back. What are you talking about? And he's
Well,
like,
the machine's broken.
the machine's broken.
Yeah, so he's kind of stuck. I have a feeling that the very last episode,
So why do I get the sense that you know?
I've
You've said this the last couple of episodes where you're like, I have a feeling
No.
we're not going to see Beast again.
I
have a feeling that
feeling-
last episode's going to be...
I have a feeling, and also I still believe that Beast is in jail because would he be free, none of these shenanigans would be happening. Like
Right.
there would be more successful things for them because he is that effective and efficient. But what I will say is there's one more episode of the season, and I don't think we go back to the future. I think that's the end of the future. Like, I think the machine being broken tells us that's the snippet you're going to get for the future. The rest of
Forge did allude to the fact that he's going to, like, once they've got it back up and running,
Right.
Bishop will be able to go
that
back.
lends itself to maybe more stories in the future, but in the immediate future, I don't think we're going to get more of that. I think it's the fallout.
You've now
of
said
Mystique.
future so many times. I
Future.
find myself wondering which future you're talking about now, the immediate future, but not the immediate future. Like there's more in the future, but we're done with the future for now.
We're not going back to the future.
We're
is what
not
I'm
going
saying.
back to the future in the immediate future.
Correct.
Maybe the distant future. We'll stay in the present for now. Okay. What do you think of Days of Future Past?
Oh, I enjoyed the last two episodes. It's a little bit confusing though, because there is another episode coming up that seems like it's part 3, but it's not part 3. So I don't really like that lack of continuity.
They do have a tendency to, like, even though each episode is a serialized component and it all begins with previously on and it'll always end with to be continued or whatever. They do tend to just do 2-parters.
Right.
And the fact that there's only one episode left means that clearly there's a 2-parter coming up that,
Oh, end of the first season, beginning of the second season.
yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. So I am curious about what that next episode will be. I will say, as a comic book fan and as someone who grew up with the Claremont era of comics and all the comics that they're alluding to, and the Jim Lee era, where we're getting all their costumes and all that stuff, I think for me, I am impressed by how they are able to boil all these very complex and, in some cases, long stories down into 2 episodes. Mm-hmm. But I am left wanting a little. Like, I sort of think that Days of Future Past could have been more than 2 episodes. It all wrapped up a little neatly for me. But again, that's just because I was already familiar with the comics. If I had never read a comic, I'm sure this 2-episode arc would have been fantastic. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was fantastic anyway, but I do find myself sort of wanting a little bit more of the struggle in the future and and all the different stuff that happens in the present.
Well, and they just kept showing the same scenes of the future.
Yeah.
The very disturbing graveyard of tombstones with names of X-Men on the tombstones, the detention centers, all these things where I'm just like, okay, what else is going on? Like, give me more than this. And I know in the comics there's more. Well, we have now arrived at the end of the show, so we get to announce the top contenders for what we'll be covering in our next season.
Yeah. So here is where we're thinking of going. This is based on recommendations from not only listeners, but also dear friends of ours who have said, if you're not planning on covering this already, you need to add this to the list. And so we have done so. And in addition to the show that you mentioned at the top, the Suicide Squad show that's on Max, the anime, we also are looking at continuing with X-Men Season 2. We are looking at Disney's Gargoyles Season 1. Now, this is a show that is constantly brought up to us by friends and listeners. It ranks very highly up there as one of the most requested shows. One of our previous runner-ups, in fact, is constantly sort of a runner-up, loses by 1 or 2 votes each time we vote, Harley Quinn, Season 1. This is also on Max, and it is a comedy incarnation of Gotham City, but genuinely, in the episodes we have seen, has been surprisingly deep and rich with psychological themes and motifs that we could explore. The Last of Us, Season 1, based on the video game of the same title. Battlestar Galactica, Season 1, and we're not talking about the original series. We are talking about the later incarnation of Battlestar Galactica. The new Batman Caped Crusader animated series, which is premiering on Max in August. And they are dropping all of the episodes at once. I think it's August 10th, if I'm not mistaken. So just over a month away. That one would be interesting, especially because it is going back to our roots of going back to Batman. And this is executive produced by Bruce Timm. So he is definitely someone we're familiar with. And it's a new version of an old character that we have loved so. And this one takes place entirely in the 30s. So I'm curious about that. And then finally, you mentioned the Max series, The Penguin, starring Colin Farrell from his role in The Batman. And that one begins in September. So if we were to choose that one, that might give us a couple of weeks where we're doing something in between, something to bridge that gap. But yeah, that's our list. X-Men season 2, Gargoyles season 1, Harley Quinn season 1, Battlestar Galactica season 1, Batman Caped Crusader, and the Penguin. And now you have added Suicide Squad. And I cannot remember the subtitle because I believe it was a Japanese word, but, and I didn't know that we were adding that to the list.
That's all right.
So we're going to add that. Go to Discord. Drea, you can tell folks where they can find us on Discord to do our initial rounds of voting. And then we will send the final 3, I would say, to our $3 tier patrons. At patreon.com/Arkham Sessions. And that's where we will definitively decide what we're covering next. How about that Discord for folks wanting to go and vote immediately?
You can find the Discord easily by going to the Arkham Sessions Instagram and just looking at the link in the bio, and that'll take you right there. It's also on my website, drdreapsychology.com. And as a reminder, many of these series have multiple seasons. So where indicated, we're doing the first season, or in this case, if we continue X-Men, it would be the second season. So you're only voting for that season as indicated. And that's all I'm going to say. I really am just kind of trying to keep quiet because I don't want to lean any which way. But all these shows, I mean, eventually, hopefully we get to all of them because they're all really interesting.
Yeah, there's no mystery as to why we chose these series.
Sure.
These are all series that we would be very happy to take a look at. And in fact, many of them, you and I have never seen Gargoyles. You and I have never seen, obviously, Batman Caped Crusader or the Penguin, and we've not seen the Suicide Squad. We have seen Harley Quinn season 1. We have seen The Last of Us season 1. We have seen Battlestar Galactica. And you may have seen X-Men season 2.
I may have seen some of those episodes back in the day.
But I'm excited and also a little nervous to quote, I guess, is it Pinkie Pie? I'm nervous-sided.
Pinkie Pie?
My Little Pony.
Oh, okay.
Friendship is magic.
I'm not nervous. I have a feeling I know what we're doing.
Is that because you're going to start voting?
I didn't tell you how many dummy accounts I have. I'm just kidding.
It turns out
I'm just
every
kidding.
patron
I have one account and it is under my name.
Okay, well then I will go ahead and thank your other patron dummy accounts here because we do have some patrons to thank for your support. It's because of your support that we're able to continue our show, and we very much appreciate it. I want to thank my father, Carl Ward, our brand new patron, SK, one of our newer patrons as well, Jamiroquai J. Then we've got Mike Ficklin, Dr. Jerome Anderson, Antonio Lopez, our dear friend, Kevin Ortel, Trevor Schwartz, Mark Pepper, Frank Moeller, our very dear friend as well, Swaras Ali, and of course, as we mentioned before, Hero's Journey Fitness, owned and run by David Nett and Christy Blacknett, and Todd Stashwick. So thank you all for making this episode and all of our episodes possible. You can have your name called out simply by going to patreon.com/Arkham Sessions and joining the $5 a month tier. That will get your name called out every month that we are making new episodes. So yeah, thank you all for joining us. Drea, otherwise, where can they find you? You said your website, and where else?
You can just go to my Instagram, Dr. Drea Psychology. That's where I post stuff.
Yeah. I post stuff at
How dare you?
at Instagram under the name B_Ward028. You can also come find us on Facebook, and you can come find the Arkham Sessions Instagram at Arkham Sessions, or I'm sorry, at the Arkham Sessions. And join our family over at Fanbase Press as well. Go read their news articles, watch their interviews from various conventions, and go listen to their other wonderful podcasts. And of course, they've got a number of great books that they have published on their own. So go check those out. Till next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
The Arkham Sessions.
This kid's crying. Do something.